Well, if you find something going faster than the speed of light, then the formula E equals mc squared essentially becomes redundant because it's only as valid as the assumption on which it's built. The fundamental assumption in the IPCC hypothesis, which of course Strong was the architect of, was that human CO2 CO2 is a greenhouse gas. That is, it traps heat. It's going to increase in amount because humans are producing more of it, and that as CO2 goes up, the temperature will rise. Those were the assumptions. Well, first of all, the most fundamental one that with CO2 increase, the temperature will rise. There's no evidence anywhere in any record of any duration for any time period in the history of the Earth in which CO2 increase precedes temperature change. In every record, it's exactly the opposite. And the most famous one, Alex, is the ice core record, which they came out with and said, oh, look, there it is, the temperature going up and down over a 400,000-year record, and there's the CO2 going up and down. And the scientists, the British and the French scientists, Jalzel at the time, I remember when this came out in the 80s, said, look, don't rush to judgment on this. But, of course, they rushed to judgment. Here it is. There's the proof. We now know that temperature change precedes CO2. So CO2 is not driving temperature at all, let alone the human portion of it. So
now, for those that don't know, Doctor, let's be specific.
Yep.
Major universities, hundreds of firms,
Yep.
It's all on record. They go out and test the ice core samples going back hundreds of thousands of years.
Yep.
And it all fits what we saw in the start of the Bronze Age, 9,000 years ago. It all shows that warming period 1,500 years ago in Europe when there was the big, the vineyards everywhere that aren't there now in northern Europe and in England, that the CO2 follows after a temperature increases. Then there's obviously more life. Things melt, more CO2 gets released because of water vapor, a lot of different reasons. You're the climatologist, you can explain it. But what Al Gore did is he moved it, he cheated, and because they're very close on the graph, but it comes after, he moved it to coincide. Go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, one of the things that was not very widely publicized was that a week before he got his Nobel Prize, and I thought the Oscar was appropriate because it was from the land of make-believe, but the Nobel Prize... The Nobel Prize is a different issue, but the week before he got it, a parent in England took the movie to court and said, look, my son's been forced to watch this 4 times. There are major scientific errors in it. And I want, if they're going to show it, I want a warning, a government warning against what's wrong with this movie. The judge ruled that the movie was propaganda. Actually, he didn't use that term specifically, but he said it's politically biased. And he said there are 9 major errors, and the one you just mentioned is one of them, the shifting of the curves to coincide. Now, that was a week before he got the Nobel Prize. Now, you could say, okay, well, the Nobel Committee couldn't have had time to see that judgment and so on, but the rulings the judge made were already in the literature, so the Nobel Prize Committee didn't do their homework. They'd already decided that they were going to give it to him, and that was the end of it. So, I don't think ever in history has a Nobel Prize been given to somebody whose work has been found criminally wrong, before he got it. It's absolutely amazing.
Well, why don't they just give him a Nobel Prize for inventing the internet? Or how about how about a Nobel Prize? Hold on, how about a Nobel Prize for Kitty Hawk? Let's just say he did that too. How about a Nobel Prize, instead of Madame Curie for inventing X-rays?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, of course, one of the things that we're seeing here, and some people have referred to this, is the big lie. The bigger the lie you tell, the more people will believe it. And, of course, one of the things that's amazing, and you mentioned this at the top of the program, that he's challenging other people, saying they're not qualified and they're flat earthers and blah, blah, blah. But nobody ever says, well, what qualifications have you got? And this is the amazing thing about how he's been able to survive and get away with what he has. But it's this whole thing about propaganda, and because it's purely propaganda. And so what we got to keep focusing on, and this is where you asked about how we deal with this, is start to look at, okay, what is CO2? And by the way, one of the things, Alex, that we talked about extremism. the first thing that's happening is that the politicians generally worldwide, but not the U.S., are realizing that the climate or cap and trade and anything to do with that is going to be harmful to the economy. So they're backing off on it that way. The other thing is that I know from all the politicians I've talked to around the globe, and I had a chance to listen to Václav Klaus in New York.
That's the head of the EU, for those that don't know.
Yeah, he's head of the EU and president of Czechoslovakia. But he, one of the things that these politicians, they've been bullied into silence because when you talk to them off the record, they said, yeah, look, we know what you're saying. We understand that, but it's absolute political suicide to go out there and suggest, because you're immediately, he doesn't care about the planet, he doesn't care about the children, about the future, and they're bullied into silence. And when you look at Exxon, for example, here's a corporation that admittedly spent $16 million on climate research. Well, I wouldn't invest in an oil company, an energy company that wasn't looking at what the climate was going to do and what the demand for their product was going to be. They've said they're not going to put any more money into it. I mean, it's just ludicrous, but they're bullied by these people into silence.
Well, yeah, that was in the New York Times that David Rockefeller, Rex Tillerson said it was all a fraud because it is. Yeah. And Rockefeller showed up at the board meeting and said, I'm going to fire all of you. I still own this company. You're going to go out and say, not only is it real, but you want a global carbon tax. That was in the news. And Rex Tillerson the next week went on TV and said, I was wrong. Man-made global warming's real. And he said, quote, we need a global tax.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and of course the other thing is that the government using the taxpayers' money is as you inferred or directly mentioned, is buying off corporations. I mean, all this idea about green jobs. And one of the things that frustrates me about this, Alex, isn't just that the U.S. the policies, the cap and trade, and so on, is not scientifically based. I would be more willing to be less cynical and skeptical about it if the ideas and proposals were new, that they were genuinely new, innovative ways, but they're not. These ideas that are in the cap and trade and what the EPA are doing have been tried by other countries and have been a disaster.
Well, let me stop you right there, and then we'll go over this. But you mentioned something earlier, about 10 minutes ago, and for the decade plus, I've been aware of this takeover plan from their own documents, and from what Maurice Strong had said, and Green Cross and Green Shield, and Mikhail Gorbachev and David Rockefeller and the UN openly saying, reduce our numbers down to 500 million. Ever since they started pushing that, I knew that China, India, Mexico, and 160 other third world and developing countries wouldn't have to make the cuts. And it was really a way to deindustrialize the West. But now what you just said is true. Now they're saying, okay, we're going to do retroactive carbon taxing, and we've got to pay $3 billion a year to China, $1 billion a year to Mexico. Calderon's on TV saying it, and Obama's saying, yes, we're going to take taxpayer money and give it to you, and then you're going to pay it to the IMF and World Bank. Mainly the IMF is the new bank of the world as your carbon credits. So more than just eugenics, that's the overall system. It's a money laundering operation for more international aid, where instead of the money going to the IMF and World Bank, they loan it to dictators or corrupt systems who then keep the money and then hand the resources over to the bankers. This is countries they've already bought off in the third world will now just take the money, keep part of it, and pay the rest right back to David Rockefeller. I mean, this is just... this is what con artists would come up with if they were just told, think of the most ridiculous, out in the open cons. So even if you believe carbon dioxide's a deadly poison that kills plants, kills animals, it's like nerve gas. The point is that we're all one planet. If China and India don't make cuts and all our jobs move there, there will be more of this VX nerve gas known as carbon dioxide, almost as deadly as dihydrogen monoxide, also water, that deadly nerve gas, more nerve gas released. Can you explain that to us?
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things about the Kyoto, and you have to go back again to Maurice Strong. He grew up on a farm in southern Manitoba in Canada, and the family were socialist extreme, almost to the point of communism. And just to give you an idea, Winnipeg, the only city in North America that had a democratically elected communist on the city council. But Maurice Strong's family...
No, he admits it. He's a hardcore piece of filth. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Okay, but one of the things, of course, that's underlying that is a redistribution of wealth. And we talked about the IPCC, but the Kyoto Accord that came out of, and by the way, this was another of his big operations, was the Rio Conference in 1992, which George Bush the Elder refused to go to. George Herbert Bush refused to go to. But the Kyoto Accord and the carbon credits was a transfer of wealth. It was a socializing of taking the wealth from those people that had worked hard and succeeded, and giving it to those that were not working hard, not succeeding. So this was part of this whole strategy, and of course, again, the vehicle was the CO2. And by the way, the carbon credits is very interesting because that idea originally with the IPCC, they were trying to get the Kyotos through.